You know, a good reminder from Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 is God always pierces the darkness, always. And the darkness doesn't last.
And the high priest, the great high priest who is Jesus Christ, he puts his hands on your life and you take your hands off and you say, my life is surrendered for your purposes.
Hey, I want to welcome everybody into another Downline Ministries podcast. My name is Jamie Trussell. I have the privilege of hosting this podcast and serving as the lead pastor of Redeemer Dripping Springs in the Austin, Texas area. We hope this podcast helps you faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring your life into others. And to help us do that, we're joined today by JD Greear. JD, thanks so much for jumping on with us.
I am delighted to be here, Jamie.
All right. So give me the, quick flyover for some that may not be as familiar with you and your work and where you're serving or your family. Kind of familiarize maybe some parts of our audience with who you are and what you've been working on.
My elevator speech for what I do would be, I am a husband and a dad. Obviously, that's the most important thing after being a follower of Jesus. But I've had the privilege of serving at the church that I serve at for about 25 years now. I'm the lead pastor of a church called the Summit Church. It's a church that aligns with Southern Baptist Convention. We believe God has given us a vision of planting 1,000 churches out of our church within this by 2050. So far, we're on number like 640 of those. That counts those we planted overseas as well as those we planted domestically. Recently we've decided we're going to separate those numbers out, and we're going to say just 1,000 domestic, because we're at a stage where the churches we're planting are starting to plant other churches. So
for sure.
It's a pretty cool time to watch exponential growth. And my call to pastor started with a call to the mission field, and I never felt like God released that call to the mission field. I just do it now as a pastor. We are right in the backyard of 3 of the most influential universities in the Southeast, which would be UNC Chapel Hill, Duke University, and NC State. And so a lot of our ministry on the weekend is to college students, and I love it. College students bring a lot of wonderful things to a church.
They do.
Money's not one of them, but
no, it is not.
There are a lot of potential missionaries.
There you go. That's right. Sending power.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So my buddy, one of my close friends in the world is Ricky Harris, and I think he was there with y'all for a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's out in Las Vegas working with one of our a friend church. So.
And I think he's looking to plant, or they're in the process of planting now out there.
He is. That's right.
Fun. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. You just came out with a work. You've written a lot of books. This one is particularly intriguing, Everyday Revolutionary, because there's a component, I think, of time and place that fits where we are in 2025, especially Western culture, specifically American culture, maybe drive it even a little bit further, specifically Southern American culture, where the whole idea in terms of culture war, even if it was our parents' generation or grandparents, I'm 42, there's still lingering a residual effect of that, even in our generation, where if somebody says it, we kind of understand intuitively what they mean by that. Tell me, what was the Lord doing in you where you kind of thought, you know what, here's a need, here's a gap. We need to be faithful in this, cultural chaos that kind of started you working on this.
Yeah. So, obviously by the grace of God, we're seeing a resurgence right now, especially among a younger generation, in an interest in really, let's just call it historic, traditional Christian view of the world. And I think one of the critical questions for our generation of leadership right now is whether we are going to allow this to be commandeered into primarily a voting block, or whether it's going to be a legitimate Jesus revolution. Mm-hmm. I try to make this really clear in Everyday Revolutionary. When you believe the gospel, it has massive social implications. It will change literally everything about you, including how you vote, how you think about almost every issue. However, anytime the gospel gets co-opted by where the tip of the spear becomes a political identification or a political program, you end up with something that is not the gospel. Everyday Revolutionary is trying to capture that. What is it that Jesus has called us to? What does it mean to be an everyday revolutionary? I try to make the point that it's not less than clarity on controversial cultural issues, just a lot more. just
Yeah.
a lot more. And so the book kind of unpacks what that is.
Well, and then in chapter 4, I think it's chapter 4, is entitled, it's a great question, why are we here? And so you ask the question in the book, obviously you answer it. Let's unpack that for a minute. You know, how do you think through why are we here? Right? If Paul says, better to depart and be with Jesus, but if I remain as fruitful labor for me on your behalf, what does it mean for us to still be here?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story from my own life and then a story from Jesus's life, and the second one's a lot more important, obviously. But the story from my life is the question that that I got the title for that chapter from was from I was actually at the White House, and a colleague, friend of mine, actually reported a conversation to me that he'd had with the president that night, who he'd offered to pray for the president, and the president said, "Hey, no, what I really need I appreciate your prayers, but I really need you to get your people out to vote for me." And my colleague had just said something a little bit offhanded, like, that's why we're here, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm not trying to pick on my friend or his words, but, I just like, really, is that why we're here? Is that why God has us here? Is that why he, set it up where we would be in the White House? Is it primarily to mobilize for voting? And again, I want to give all due respect to those that need to work in those fears. But what I realize that we're here for is to preach the gospel and to create a movement of making disciples, which has political ramifications. But I'm less concerned, Jamie, with the lever somebody pulls once every 1,460 days.
Sure.
And much more concerned about whether they have a biblical worldview on issues like transgenderism and abortion the other 1,459 days.
That's a great word. Yep.
So, the story from Jesus's life it was Luke chapter 12. One brother comes to Jesus, a younger brother, and complains that his older brother is not sharing the inheritance with him. And D. Martin Lloyd-Jones, the great Reformed, preacher, said, that's a legitimate social justice complaint in the first century, because older brothers could use their status to really manipulate the system. And Jesus's response is surprising, if not almost a little off-putting. He said, "Man, who made me a judge over you?" And then he proceeds to preach a sermon on greed that would have applied to both brothers, both the younger and older brother, about the dangers that greed could have to somebody's soul. D. Martin Lloyd-Jones says, does Jesus not care about justice? Is he just saying this is not important? He said, of course not. I mean, like, Jesus's whole ministry was about justice. He had strong things to say on justice. But Lloyd-Jones says, had Jesus stopped there to, kind of differentiate and get involved and figure out who was right and who was wrong and all that sort of stuff, he said a couple things would have happened. One, he would have cut off immediately anybody who agreed with the other brother.
That's a good
He
point.
said number two, he would have had a list of people a mile long the next day saying, "Hey, I want you to weigh in on my issue." So when Jesus says, "Man, who made me a judge over you?" what he's actually saying is, that's important, but that's not my calling. I realize that when it comes to a lot of political issues, I do want to speak clearly about everything the Bible speaks clearly about. I don't want to not back down. If saying that God created two genders makes me sound partisan, I'll just sound partisan. But I know that there's a lot of really good questions that I just don't, I always tell our church, I might be wrong in my opinion on global warming, but I'm not wrong about the gospel. And so I don't want to let my opinions on the former keep people from hearing me on the latter. I've got an opinion on global warming. I think my Christian worldview helps me form an opinion on global warming and gun control and nationalized healthcare and all of it. But I limit my bandwidth, trying to be like Jesus. I limit my bandwidth, and because I bear authority as a representative of the church, I limit my bandwidth to things that I know very clearly, thus says the Lord.
So, why is it, do you think, we observe, maybe in my ministry and yours, that there seems to be so much angst and passion, and you can get an emotional rise, let's say, out of a global warming conversation and an engagement, maybe more so than a gospel conversation in the church sometimes?
Well, part of that is the social media world we live in, algorithms that are designed to build outrage. It's ironic because it's the closer you are aligned to somebody, the more that social media will make you outraged at where they differ from you. So it has a tendency to where, if you look at like Christian Twitter or Christian X, most of the hate is not between like believers and people that are just outright pagans. It's between believers that are like, well, you see this, you're wrong, and you're not supportive of Trump enough, and you're way too supportive of Trump, and all that kind of stuff. And that part of that is just, I mean, we're in a milieu right now where it thrives off of that kind of intramural outrage, and so they have a financial vested interest in fostering it. One of the things that was interesting and tragic was back with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Just a horrific event. You've got, 5 days later, I come into the church, and our people, the majority of them, all week long, all they've been seeing were these heroic, bold things that Charlie Kirk would say on a college campus. Like he's the only guy that's out there willing to say it. And it was, our people were like, man, they felt like Jesus had been assassinated, like had been attacked. Like somebody representing Jesus. And other people, because of their social media algorithm, literally all they'd seen, Jamie, were these outrageous things that Charlie would say, whether in context or out of context. I won't weigh in on that right now, but just outrageous sounding things that he said about race and women and women of color and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, how could the church ever be a fan or supportive of this guy? They are products. Both are products of the same social media algorithm, creating tribalism in two different ways.
That's
My point in
thriving
telling
on
you
it.
all that is that the church is supposed to be different. It's not supposed to be built on those. It's supposed to be unity in Christ. That doesn't ignore the issues or paper over them, but talks about them in the context of relationship and with an attempt at mutual understanding.
So that segues perfectly to, and you have to forgive me if I'm wrong, I think chapter 6, you talk about avoiding if I get the title wrong, forgive me, I'm not looking at it, but avoiding the culture war detour.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned being different. What's the pathway there? Because there's this whole idea of like this kind of third wimpy way, right? Well, if you don't do this, you just kind of wimped out, and we're just I'm not kind of plug our ears, right? The old Lord of the Rings Schmeagle, la 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 la, like
Yeah.
But so how do you avoid the pitfall while still being faithful?
Yeah, no, great question. That's kind of what the whole part 2 of the book is about, is what that looks like in practice. I really do set it up with this question of, one of the key verses in the book is Jeremiah 29, where God says basically to Daniel's generation through the prophet Jeremiah, hey, don't seek the overthrow of Babylon right now. Stay there, pray for its prosperity, put down roots in it, basically, he said, because in its prosperity, you will prosper. You wonder if you've been a Jew, a believing Jew alive at that time, if you'd have been like, oh, but we need a Moses, we need a David to come slay the Goliath, and a Moses to face down Pharaoh, except Pharaoh's name is Nebuchadnezzar now. And God says, hey, that'll happen one day. But for right now, that's not the role that I have for you. I want you to stay and to bless. And that is the same kind of role that we have now, because we live as exiles. The Old Testament, of all the people we should identify with in the Old Testament, or the time period, it's Daniel in the time of the exile. We too are living as exiles. And listen, I'm all for voting in people who will promote the Christian worldview, but I also understand that until Jesus himself returns, we are living as exiles in Babylon, and our role is to Jeremiah 29, 4-7, our generation. Part 2 of the book just says, what does that look like? What does that mean if you're a third grade teacher who goes to work at a public school? Or what does it mean if you're the CFO of a multinational conglomerate? There's a job description that God gives, and that's what the whole epistles of First Peter and First Timothy are really about, is how do you embody this going into the workplace.
Okay, so bullet point some of that for us in our audience. What's on that job description?
Yeah, I say, well, everybody, what we're called to in Babylon is we have careers and lives that are, number one, creation fulfilling.
Okay.
That just means that the first commission given to the people of God was to, populate the earth and to bless it and to make it suitable for humans to live and flourish in. So that's number one. Second is that it is excellence pursuing. And what I mean by that is that we are We are to do what we do as a way of showing off the excellence of God. Our work should have the highest levels. It says that Daniel had an excellent spirit. He was 10 times better than every other wise man and pretty much whatever he touched. It is to be holiness reflecting. Peter says we're to be holy like God is holy. So, in our work, we do that too. Paul really builds that out in his epistles. Do your work as unto the Lord and not unto men. The fourth one is redemption displayed. That just means that Christians have a penchant for grace, and that unbelievers don't have. And it's one of the greatest ways in the workplace that we can demonstrate the gospel. And the fifth is mission advancing. And that is we are looking for ways. Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. And it's saying that, when God makes you good at what you do, you will stand before kings, and you should use that moment to testify very clearly about who Jesus is. Those are the things that's what the substance of what it means to be an everyday revolutionary. Leslie Newbigin, who was a missionary to India for almost 40 some years, 50 years, from Great Britain. When he came back to Great Britain, he left in like 1930, came back in 1970 or something like that. And he said that during the time that he was gone from Great Britain had changed from being a sending country to be in itself mainly a mission field. And he said, pastors in Great Britain, we're going to have to learn the skills of the foreign missionary. Same thing's true, obviously, in the United States now.
Yeah.
And Leslie Newbigin says, in a foreign culture like this, in a hostile culture, the very first place that you can demonstrate the distinction between Babylon and the kingdom of God is how you pursue your work in the workplace.
Okay.
And that's really what the heart of the book is about.
Yeah. And well, I mean, that drives down to kind of the intrinsic dignity of work and the reality of expressing worship back to God in and of itself, right? There's not, I mean, yes, it's meaningful if we can get gospel inroads and share that, but I feel like for a while, at least, coming up, you had to almost spiritually sanitize your work to make it worthwhile, which misses, I think, a big component of the creation narrative, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, work and worship share the same word in Hebrew, abad. To work and to worship, God put a link in those from the very beginning. How you do your work is itself an expression of worship. People think about what it means to be a Christian in business, and they think you got to open up a hair salon called His Clips, or a coffee shop called Hebrews, or something like that. And that's great, if you want to do that. But really, it means doing your work in a way that's creation fulfilling, holiness reflecting, excellence pursuing, generosity, redemption displaying, and mission advancing.
By the way, if His Clips doesn't exist, I'm going to trademark that after this.
Exactly right. Yeah, buy the domain right now.
Yes, I'm on it. Yes, His Clips. Okay, well then so two questions for you coming out of that. One, there's a whole section of your book kind of thematically that falls under live quietly, right? Which is Paul's exhortation to the church at Thessalonica, like live peaceful and quiet lives. And I can already hear, maybe even in myself and others, okay, well, how do I then boldly take a stand for something while also being told to live a quiet and peaceful life? How do I, what's the faithful navigation of what seems contradictory? It's not, but of what seems contradictory on the surface.
Yeah, great question, because let's keep in mind who coined the phrase live quietly was the same guy who stood in an amphitheater full of angry Ephesians and says the gods that you worship are not really gods at all.
That's right.
I mean, so this is not a demure guy who's quiet in the corner, reading his Bible and minding his own business. What Paul meant was live in a way that blesses your neighbors, 29, 4-7, and they begin to wonder what the distinction is between you and them in a way that makes them curious about it. Peter said it in his own word. He used different words, but it's the same concept. He said, live remarkably. The Greek word is kalos, live remarkably. And when you do, 1 Peter 3:15, they'll have a reason to ask, or they'll ask the reason for the hope that's in you. So the point is that a quiet life is not a, mum's the word life. I got to mind your own business.
Right.
But a quiet life sets up a loud testimony.
So so take our current, cultural ethos. Why is it so easy, in your opinion, that we can be quickly dismissive of loving our enemies? It's almost like if I deem someone an enemy, I'm capitulating or being unfaithful. If I'm charitable or gracious or no, they need They need to be crushed and they need to be vanquished because they're a threat. And I do think there's some real thinking like that in the evangelical world at the moment. It's probably fear-based, and there are a lot of things that go into it. And hey, I'm not immune to thinking that sometimes. I can get ticked off like anybody else, but there's a check in that where part of that quiet life that's so transformative is we actually treat those that might be deemed an enemy radically differently than the world does. And yet, I don't know, that seems to be one that we kind of give ourselves a pass on at times.
Yeah, no, well, you're right. I mean, and that's all the reason that's so prominent in the church and the evangelical world is because it's part of the flesh and it's part of the weaponry of the flesh. Now, again, let's just be clear. Paul took people on in the marketplace, and he, presented
100%.
truth, and he reasoned for the truth. And but there was just he wasn't trying to vindicate himself,
Mm,
and he was trying to win his enemies. I mean, Jesus is the one who said he came not to condemn but to save.
mm,
And again, Jesus put people in their place all the time. I
100%.
mean, verbally, he would say, this is wrong, and we rebuke the works of darkness. But that's why I keep going back to, faithfulness to Jesus in this kind of age is not less than clarity about cultural
Mhm.
issues. It's just more, because I'm actually seeking your good. I didn't come to condemn; I came to save. And that means,
Mm,
yes, pointing out your error, but it also means loving you. It also means genuinely being your friend.
mhm.
One of the things that is remarkable about Jesus, John says, is that he was filled with grace and truth.
Both. That's
Grace
right.
and truth. He didn't like have a toggle switch where he was in grace mode or truth mode. He was like
Mhm.
full of both at all times. He was so truthful that they wanted to kill him.
Mhm.
Jesus's crucifixion was a joint project between the secular left and the religious right in one
Mm,
sense. Yet he's so graceful that sinners long to be around them.
yeah.
Grace without truth, that's liberalism. That's
Mhm.
compromise. Truth without grace, that's fundamentalism
That's
or Christless
fundamentalism.
conservatism.
Yeah.
Christless conservatism. It's what the Bible calls us to is something that is neither grace without truth or truth without grace. I remember hearing this thing about it's an old Scottish proverb that for every 1 mile of road, there's 2 miles of ditch. I
Mm,
grew up all my life, Jamie, hearing about the ditch on the left side of the Christian road, which was cowardly compromise. Nobody
mm,
ever warned me about the ditch on the right side of the road, which was Christless conservatism. And I
mm.
think both of them will take you off of the gospel.
Well, it's funny. I mean, it's like you're reading my notes. You wrote an article in October of this year. I think Gospel Coalition put it out, and you talk about kind of the fallacy, or maybe you say the danger of the two ditches, right? And I think too, growing up, I mean, I'm an Auburn, Alabama kid, growing up there my whole life, and it is like the ditch for me to watch out for is like licentiousness and sin. Don't drink, don't smoke, right? Don't do any, God forbid you dip. And if you can avoid those things, you're on a pretty good track. And, to quote the late Tim Keller, you kind of get, and by the way, I didn't necessarily, I fell in that ditch. All right. A lot. Uh, but Keller's line about even doing the right things for the wrong reason is maybe even more of a detrimental ditch than pure licentiousness. But talk about, when you talk about maybe a little bit more, a little deeper dig on the two ditches and how to avoid them.
Well, you don't want to. This is where people can sometimes misconstrue what Keller said, and recently Keller's been criticized a lot, mainly because he's not here to defend himself.
I was about to say, yeah, that's exactly funny how that worked.
Yeah, but they criticize because they say it was moral equivocation, and they
Mm,
say, you're saying left and right are equally bad.
mm,
I'm not saying that. I will let Tim Keller's writings defend themselves. I
that's
won't go
exactly
into
right.
defending that one way or the other. But yes, I don't think the secular left and religious right are morally equivalent. I think there's moral asymmetry. I mean, the transgender revolution, that's basically child abuse disguised
That's
as
right.
political correctness, and abortion, which is the
Murder.
murder of
Murder.
infants in the womb. I mean, that's, yes, that those are horrendous things. But what Keller often said correctly is that one of Jesus's main focal points was how religion, apart from the gospel,
Mm,
is damning.
mm,
And the famous story of the father with the two sons. You have one that represents licentiousness and one that represents legalism, and both of them are outside the house.
Both of them. Yep.
Both of them politically corrupt. I'm not even saying they're equally bad or there's never a wiser choice. I'm just saying, and it's like Jesus's crucifixion was a joint project of both the licentious on the one side and then the religious on the other side. And we've got to be gospel people, which is neither of those.
So how do we then, we got about 5 more minutes here. Say I'm engaged, I'm discipling someone, I'm pouring what, how am I helping, or what's your thoughts on how we can help make this really pragmatic and tangible? Of maybe I'm talking with someone and they are so wrapped up in gung ho, and it's like, man, if this candidate loses, my life's over, and if this one wins, and Jesus is basically coming back, and like, what are some good starting places? Maybe good questions, good thoughts you have on how to help people navigate this?
Yeah. An idol is usually something that's good that you just give too much weight to.
Yeah, like Auburn football, which will disappoint you every time.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say it, but, I
Hey,
just,
it's a
the Holy
terrible
Spirit says
false
what he's going
god.
to say.
It's like false god should at least do something for you. Yeah, not that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel your pain. UNC Chapel Hill fan over here. So what I don't want to counsel is that Christians are disengaged, got their head in the sand. I just go to church. No, you got to get your hands dirty in politics, meaning every Christian should vote. And you know what? God's going to call some Christians into the political sphere.
For sure.
And I've had people say, well, is that a contradiction? Because you're trying to say the gospel often, it like trumps your engagement. There's a guy, and I talk about this in the book, named, he wrote, his name's Abraham Kuyper.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he said there's a distinction between church as organization and church as organism. The church as organism is in every part of society. That's Christians that are in the post office, and they're in the local schools, and they're in the police force, and they're sitting on the Supreme Court bench.
Sure.
He said that they have a certain role to bring the salt and light of Jesus's presence there. And they should acknowledge, I'm a Christian, and that's why I think like this about healthcare, global warming, you fill in the blank, education. He said the church as organization, the leaders of that, which would be me, one of the leaders of that, we have to limit our authority to what the Bible, what the Bible actually says. So, for example, the Bible tells us that we should care about the poor. We all agree on that.
That's right.
But I don't know of a verse, Jamie, that spells out the ideal marginal tax rate. Or one that says this is the percentage of refugees that you should let into your country. What that means is I preach compassion for the poor, respect for the immigrant. I am not going to encumber our church's message with the applications of that. And therefore that means
that's right.
This candidate or this many refugees.
This policy, or that's right.
Yeah. I mean, now I do think Christians should have an opinion on those. And I myself have an opinion. I'm just not going to tie that to the church's authority or let that come out of the pulpit, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. But there would be some, right, that would clap back at you and say, well, you're compromised because you're not taking right. I mean, that's part of the evangelical landscape that we're in right now.
Absolutely. They would say I'm being cowardly. They would say that who better to speak to these things than a pastor? And I say, yes, in some ways I get that. Who better to adjudicate the younger brother's complaint in Luke 12 than Jesus? But he wouldn't do it because he couldn't let important things take the place of the one essential thing that he had to do, and that is preach the gospel and make disciples.
Okay, so that's very well said. Okay, JD, final words, just kind of on this idea and topic, encouragements, towards our audience about some good, faithful pathways forward, and then tell everybody where they can find you and find more of your resources because they can be helped out by them, I'm certain.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think, Jamie, that my stuff is not original. If it's original, that's a problem. I think Christians have been faithfully saying these kinds of things for a couple thousand years, and we Christians have struggled, and they've tried to figure out the balance of this. I do hope the book Everyday Revolutionaries is a helpful discussion point. Right now, media did a great video curriculum goes along with it. It'd be
cool.
good for small groups, whether it's in the workplace or in the church. I hope it's helpful. Hope it's a good contribution. That plus pretty much any resource I put out, the majority of which are free. sermons, blogs, articles, that kind of stuff. It's all on jdgreear.com, jdgreear.com. That's a good place to find that. Plus other books that I've written that may be helpful for somebody. So if somebody want to know more, they could go there.
Well, I have been blessed by your just works, and especially the articles from afar have been super helpful for me. So I appreciate that. And Ricky Harris, I mentioned, one of my great friends, speaks highly of you. So thankful for your investment in that direction. And thankful you spent time with us today on the Downline podcast. I really appreciate it.
Big fan, Jamie. So thanks for having me on.
We thank you for listening to this episode of the Downline podcast. Please subscribe, give us 5 stars, help us to get this content out to as many people as possible as we continue to partner with men and women in the Great Commission as we seek to make disciples as a lifestyle for a lifetime.